welcome to the Psychiatry and Psychotherapy podcast. I'm here to talk about getting rid of burnout, increasing job satisfaction, and feeling like an expert in what you do. One thing that created a lot of burnout and angst for me was trying to get continued medical education right at the last minute. So why not join the CME membership and do CME while listening to this podcast? Go to psychiatrypodcast.com, sign up, sign in, take the test, and the certification is emailed to you in seconds. All right, welcome back to the Psychiatry and Psychotherapy podcast. I am joined today with none other than Dr. Drew Ramsey. He is a leading, I would say the leading nutritionist, nutritional psychiatrist, talking about lifestyle, talking about diet. He wrote a book recently called Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. And he is an assistant clinical professor at Columbia University. And you recently moved to a beautiful part of America. I'm a little bit jealous.
I've been living in a lot of beautiful parts of America, David. You've also moved to a beautiful part of America. Hey, everybody, it's really nice to be back, David. It's so I love this podcast because it's just such a nice community in the sense of all of us caring about mental health, caring about psychiatry and psychotherapy, and so it's a treat to be back. And I don't know, especially now, it means we've survived the pandemic so far. So it's nice to be chatting with everybody.
Yeah, I think everyone is so used to Zoom now. We are Zooming. So tell me about your move. Where did you move and why?
It's like I went to a group meeting of local therapists here in Jackson, and they said, as we went on the circle, like talking about our needs from the group, and I said, I'm in transition. I really have no idea what my needs are, and it felt like a very honest statement. So I'm in a lot of transition. We've been living in really rural Indiana, which has been amazing for the past number of years on our family farm, and for a lot of different reasons, mostly around sort of kids and community, and interest in climbing big mountaintops and starting another chapter in our life. We moved out to Jackson, Wyoming, where we're opening up another branch of the Brain Food Clinic, and it's exciting. We're just a couple months in, so it's been really exciting. But like everybody is experiencing, all of you out who've moved or had transitions or have losses, it's really a challenging time to transition in any way. I mean, it's a different time in the sense than we've ever had before in mental health, where, when you moved in the past, you terminated with all your patients, off you went. I didn't terminate with any patients really based on the move. Certainly have had some terminations since the move, but both to Indiana and to Wyoming. So it's been interesting that, now we have in some ways more security in our patient-doctor relationship than ever before.
Oh yeah. That's a nice, yeah. When I moved here, I kept a lot of my private patients, cash-based patients, and picked up some new ones from the podcast. Actually, a lot of people reaching out. So if you are interested in Dr. Drew Ramsey being your psychiatrist, you could reach out to him. You have licenses all over, don't you?
I got licensed in, 7 states now. And we really, over the last year, have tried to expand our clinical services to one, just offer more, ranging from free cooking classes to coaching, so people can really engage with the information and ideas around nutritional psychiatry, and not necessarily have to see me as a psychiatrist, but I'm also seeing I'm mostly a psychotherapist who likes to talk about food occasionally, as probably and a handy psychiatrist. But for me, the food kind of integrates in an overall, holistic approach, and it's kind of one of the pieces of the puzzle I try and at least get right.
Yeah. So reading your book was a very different experience. I can tell you're a therapist because you're imagining in your mind the hundreds of clients you've had and the conversations, hundreds, thousands of clients you've had, and the conversations around food and their defenses and their anxieties, and how food is more than just what you eat. It's culture, it's family, it's comfort. And when I'm reading this book, it doesn't read like the average diet book. The average diet book starts with, you've been thinking about it all wrong. You've been lied to your whole life. And then progresses into here's what the data really says. And I think you're accurate in saying a lot of us have diet fatigue almost at this point, where we've read, I don't know, like I think at one point I was like, I've read about 12 diet books, like hardcore, like vegan diet, hardcore ketogenic diet, and intermittent fasting. So your book has a very different flavor. It's talking about mental health. It's talking about, how these different things affect our brain, categories of food. So I'm excited to kind of get into it today.
Well, thank you. It's nice to hear that feedback. I did sort of write it from clinical experience, and in my clinical experience, fear sucks and is a really motivating intervention for some people in terms of medicine. And I think in terms of more, I don't know, the traditional fields of medicine, we think about, smoking cessation, or we think about how we motivate people to change because of heart health, right? You're going to have a heart attack if you don't do this. There's a lot of, I would say, fear mongering. And that's also really happens in the wellness world, but that creates just a lot of, I think, stigma around mental health, but just a lot of fear around something that should mostly be pleasurable. So my feeling is our clinic, and I've really been influenced by Samantha O'Keefe, who's been really helped develop these ideas, but also I think broaden them to be much more inclusive, but to really add joyfulness. I think the main thing Samantha did is really joyfulness is like the tip of the spear, in the sense that we're here to enjoy our lives. We're here to really enjoy the bounty of delicious food Mother Nature has given us. And people have gotten really disconnected from that. Like the biggest finding in the SMILE study, which was probably the best randomized trial around, maybe not the best, but it's the first around how food can be used to treat clinical depression. So there was a trial of about 60 people who were in clinical treatment. Most of them, the majority of the sample, was in some type of psychotherapy or taking an SSRI. And they added on a Mediterranean-style diet. These 7 sessions with a nutritionist, emphasized Mediterranean diet plus a little extra red meat. There was some data that this research group had found that meat consumption has a kind of U-shaped curve relationship with depression. And they found that 32.3% of individuals went to full remission. So that's just like a remarkable number in terms of, if that were a medication, blockbuster billion-dollar drug, right? So taking that and then incorporating that data into clinical practice has really captivated us. And it does ask, this chapter, Eat or Heal Thyself, where I think part of it is I've been doing this for more than 10 years now. My first book, The Happiness Diet, came out in 2011. And I found myself, I was not in a joyful place, right? I'm either arguing with the vegans about whether there's B12 in algae or not, or I'm, having to be really defend or be scared of ketosis, right? There's just it's really uncomfortable, I found. And it didn't feel true to me as a physician and as a psychiatrist, where I really like a stance that your life is yours. My job is really to help you enjoy it and live it to its fullest. And there are a lot of different diets that humans have eaten and currently eat that are successful and feed our brain. And if we focus on the nutrients, focus on your values, focus on joy, I think we do a better job of helping people.
That's good. Yeah. Just to kind of look at that study, since we do have a lot of providers who listen to this, what did it do compared to, what was the placebo group, or what? Can you tell me a little bit more?
Yep, the placebo group. So this was a randomized, double-blind trial. Placebo group was a befriending protocol that's been shown to be, gives people time, lets people talk, does some crafts, does some stuff. The other group is, again, getting 7 sessions. So you're getting equivalent number of sessions. Intervention, again, focuses on adapting Mediterranean style diet. So an example of that is olive oil. You're talking to patients about food. It's I never did this. No one taught me this in training. Hey, what kind of oils do you cook with? But that's such a fundamental piece of information as somebody interested in brain health and trying to help people, whether you're a psychotherapist, psychiatrist, you're trying to get the brain to grow and change. And we know that there are certain dietary patterns that make that easier and enhances that. And there are certain dietary patterns that just don't seem to help that and seem to promote depression and anxiety. And so in terms of the study, what was really interesting, so the finding, what changed? What changed? People ate 1 fish meal more a week. People ate half a serving of fruit and a serving of vegetables more. think it was half a serving of nuts and beans, so it was moderate changes. People added in a little bit of food, but what people really cut out was 21 highly processed food meals a week. And that really kind of stands out, as that feels like the big change, is people really shifting off of this modern, highly processed food diet, which tends to be quite inflammatory, tends to not make us feel good. It's not like you eat fast food and you're like, yeah, I'm taking care of my health. Right? You think like, ugh, like I needed that on this road trip, but 12 chicken McNuggets in 2.5 minutes. That's just never going to sit well. So it's, in some ways, a lot of this feels at times like common sense that's now backed up by good data. But those are some more details of the SMILE study for clinicians who are interested. Felice Jacka is really the mother of nutritional psychiatry when it comes to research. She and Michael Burke, along with a few other researchers, have really been the early champions of this. Almuda Sanchez Villegas and her group at University of Las Palmas in Spain.
We should have some of these people on the podcast together.
Oh, you should. Almu is great. I did an interview with her for Medscape years ago at the international. Yeah. There's an international. I mean, for people who are interested in this stuff, there are a few ways to get into nutritional psychiatry. I'd mention our course just because our course is the only CME course for nutritional psychiatry. It's a 10.25-hour course. We recorded it at the Omega Institute. We had about 30 clinicians live there, and we've had hundreds of people go through the training. And then we have a small clinician group, about 30 to 50 clinicians. We get together monthly. But along with that course, there's great information at the Mood and Food Center, which is in Australia, and Felice Jacka, her group, and wonderful set of resource and just incredible data. All this great data coming out about the microbiome and inflammation. And
I want to get into it. Let's get into it.
Yeah.
Let's get into the nuts and bolts.
The nuts and bolts of it? Like, why does nutritional psychiatry work?
So just for my sort of curiosity. So you had this control group, you had the actual group, and you're saying that the nutritional group in this Smiley study was 30%?
Yeah, 32.3% of those patients went into full remission. I don't remember exactly. I want to say it was about 8% went into remission in the other group.
Okay. So there's a big effect. That's and
if you want to start, so that's one trial. There's sort of the classic 5 nutritional psychiatry trials, which are randomized trials.
From your idea, like what effect size are we looking at, like overall, if we're doing this?
I think that's going to depend on the population. And so I think there's, oftentimes we think about these interventions, wellness and lifestyle interventions, as like, this is for adjustment disorder. This is for mild depression. This isn't for anybody who's really got some challenges. And I think there's some data that really suggests that's incorrect. One is just I would say, personal data that all of us have who've been clinicians. I started in community mental health and working with a great psychiatrist, Christina Mangurian, who's now I think vice chairman at UCSF. She got really interested in nutrition for individuals in our day program with severe mental illness, usually schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder. Because they were in our day program, we were feeding them lunch every day. And Christina really saw this as an opportunity to, in some ways, do some food justice work of really helping this population do a better job. As everybody was getting on at that point years ago, it was like, 2004. Everyone's kind of getting transitioned from typical antipsychotics onto atypical antipsychotics. And a lot of folks are gaining a lot of weight. Mm-hmm. And so we start adding more vegetables. It was really the first food intervention that I'd been a part of. We started, I remember we had a patient, we switched to white rice, and he stood up in group meeting and he was pissed. It was just like, what is this brown rice? He's like, this isn't my food. This isn't my culture. I remember we had this group meeting, and if you've been to community mental health, these are wonderful, wonderful opportunities to really be with patients and hear more of patients' process. And the group kind of decided, we're going to do 50-50 split. We're going to do half brown rice, half white rice. And Max said, okay, all right, that's fine. And it was just little things like that taught me these kind of small steps, right? We added in more plants. People really were eating a lot of candies and sweets. We added in more fresh fruit. And one of those things people are like, oh, fruit has sugar. Who knows? It's like, well, for this population in that setting, getting people from candy to fruit thinning people from, really sweet fruit to kind of maybe a little bit, I don't know, mellower fruit. That was something we saw happen in patients. And so those are the personal experience, right? Then in the data and kind of like what happens, there are a number of trials. The Healthy Med trial was a group intervention. So I always joke in my talks, David, I always say like, this would be great for my depression. It was a group Mediterranean style cooking class. I was like, that just makes me feel better thinking about it. Like, oh, what are you doing tonight, Drew? It's like, oh, it's Tuesday night and I've got my Mood is Food Mediterranean style cooking class. We're sampling olive oils, like cooking. So that was every 2 weeks. I'm trying to remember what their control group was. It was like it was a group where they got some like snacks and they hung out and did crafts and picture books. So again, an active control group.
Yep.
And what was interesting about this trial, the reason I bring it up is 86.3% of the sample was extremely or severely depressed. It was in the sort of top 20% of depression.
Yeah.
So they're I can't remember. I think this trial was a HAM-D. I don't think that's right. I can't remember, but their depression rating scores were quite high.
Yeah.
And what they found is a really significant rapid drop that then was maintained for 6 months. So they had, I think it was about a 40% drop. People didn't go into full remission, but they exited severe depression. And as you and I know, that going from really being severely depressed to being mildly depressed, that's life-saving and a big change. So that was another nutritional trial. And since we're talking trials, since you want to talk science, this was a really quick study. This study takes 21 minutes. And if I asked you, David, in 21 minutes of contact time, if I could reduce college depression in freshmen by 30%, would you give me those 21 minutes?
Sure. Yeah.
Besides that, I also need some boxes filled with olive oil, some nut butter, some nuts like almonds, cashews, and some cinnamon and turmeric. Can you give me that plus 21 minutes?
I don't know if we can afford that.
Okay.
We're gonna let
whoever's listening that could afford that, or if you're worried about college depression, or if you're on a college campus treating college kids, check out this great study by Heather Francis. It happened in Australia. They looked at, there were individuals in psychology sort of 101, and they had bad eating habits and they had depression. They showed these kids a 13-minute video, these students. They're basically like, hey, depression and food are related. Actually, I haven't seen the video, so this is the summary in their study. I asked to see the video, and it's proprietary. They wouldn't let me see it yet. But essentially, like, eat more like a Mediterranean-style diet, eat more plants, eat less garbage.
Here's some nuts.
Here's a box of olive oil nuts, like roast up veggies in olive oil, eat nuts for snacks, eat more fish. Here's some recipes, like a lot of resources. And then a week after they saw the video, they called him up for 5 minutes. Like, hey, David, how are you, man? How's the box of food? What are you cooking? You have any problems? Well, look, keep eating for your mental health. Okay, good job. And then a week later, they called back 5 minutes. Hey, David, it's been a couple of weeks. Right? That's the whole intervention. They drop anxiety, depression, and stress rating scales at 3 and I think 6 months by it's like more than 30%, like statistically significant drop.
Impressive.
So it is impressive, right? So small trial, again, dietary encouragement, which I find in younger people, they're much more everybody's sort of tuned into this now, but there's more awareness. And so those are some of the clinical trials I think that inform why talking about food in clinical practice, it's a good idea. It's a good idea right now. And it's also, I would say, it's something we've been missing. It's just something we weren't taught to do. It's kind of obvious, right? Your brain runs on food. It's made of food. It dictates in some ways how much inflammation is in your body and in your brain. Why the hell wouldn't we really be interested in that if we care about brain health?
Yeah, no, I think that begs the question, what are the major roadblocks you see for people trying to eat healthier?
Well, we just dropped a new resource on our site for brain food on a budget, because one that we hear is cost. And so we kind of wanted to do the calculation. How much does it cost to eat a brain healthy diet a week? How much does it cost to go out and just stock your kitchen? In the Smiles trial, individuals saved over $100 a month So over $1,000 a year, almost $1,200 a year they saved because, they're eating at home more. You're eating that processed food seems cheap, but over time it's not very satiating. People buy a lot of it. It leads to eating out, eating a lot more, kind of expensive food. As opposed to, simple food, cooking at home most of the time is saves you money. So we have that source on our site, Brain Food on a Budget, because we got all these questions. And so we put on our most value budget-friendly recipes from my books, along with some kind of calculations and information about how to really save money and do brain food well. So that's one barrier, is accessibility. Another barrier, people say time. And I think this just speaks to the overall mental health problem, that if we're living a lifestyle where we don't have time to take care of ourselves, or we have this fantasy that someone else is going to take really good care of us, right? That thing that you pull out of the freezer, like, look, some pre-processed and pre-prep food, that's great. I don't want people to stress out that everything needs to be from scratch, but it just feeds into an overall lifestyle where we're not active in taking care of our mental health, right? We're too busy to exercise. We're too busy to sleep well. We're too busy to eat well. And I think it's where I think you and I often meet people where the big switch that folks make is they take care of their mental health and kind of get on a journey to recovery as they get more active often in those areas.
That's good. That's really good. What about, you talk about like omega-3s?
Well, before we talk omega-3s, can we talk another barrier? Sorry.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Because it links to something else that we tried to do this year. So another barrier we found is people, you don't know how to do this stuff. And I'm a parent. It's kind of scary. You're cooking dinner. You want everybody to eat it. You want it to go down nice and easy. You want to clean up. Right.
This is probably my main barrier. It's
you don't want to be like,
hey,
kids, let's try sardine toast. And they're like, blah. Right. And then you're like, you got 2 hungry kids and no backup plan. Right. So that there are lots of challenges. I would say one is around skills and knowledge of these foods, and then the experience of cooking them together. So we started the Mental Fitness Kitchen. We have a wonderful new member of our team at the Brain Food Clinic, Emily Berner. She's been in charge of the culinary garden and cooking classes at New York Presbyterian Hospital. And she's brought this wonderful kind of virtual cooking school to our clinic. We've been doing classes every month, and it's a time to, like, I don't know, have you ever used like canned salmon, David?
Canned salmon. Gosh, no, not often, but I use,
it's okay. It's
I do like, we get frozen salmon. That's
okay.
The easiest at this point.
So, that's super easy. I'd not used canned salmon much either. But as we started getting a lot of questions over the years, just about, look, I don't have a fishmonger. I live in a food desert. Like, I'd love to eat wild salmon, but I can't afford it. So canned fish, incredible value. You can get a half a pound of salmon for $3. And then what do you do with it, right? First is you got to get used to it. You got to open it up and look. It's kind of like opening a can of cat food the first time. Then you look at it and you're like, is it cooked? So many people have. No. I wasn't raised with fish. So many people have fears of new foods, understandably. So just getting that experience kind of together in a cooking class, we made wild salmon burgers from the book. I've got this great recipe for canned wild salmon burgers. Ooh. Pretty intentionally with the idea of, I love a burger, good grass-fed burgers. I think pretty tasty brain food, but of just giving us a way, especially during the pandemic, to make sure I had like a good stock of omega-3 fats and seafood. And then my kids liked them. I started making them, instead of burgers, little croquettes. And it was like the first time my daughter had asked for a repeat from a recipe book. She was like, Dad, will you make those wild salmon burgers again? And I started to cry right on the spot there. I was like, every night. Like, I'm going to start crying now.
Oh, man. It just touches your soul, right? The other day, this was one of those moments for me. We were downtown at the farmer's market. I had just gotten some microgreens.
Microgreens, knowing you, right?
Which I'm like, microgreens for me are the new kale. It's
well, they are. They're the veal of the kale world. Just so you know, it's like we're babies. Like, are you eating the real veal of the plant world? Or are you eating the sunflower sprouts?
I'm eating there were basil microgreens.
That's like a whole. It's fine, but like that's like pounds of pesto that you're just feasting on. Could be. It's babies, David. Those are baby plants.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so they grow them to kill them as babies, though. Does that make it better?
That's exactly, yeah.
So I'm sitting there eating this in front of my kids, And my kids had some and then kept eating it. And I was just like,
Yeah, right.
this is beautiful. Because my kids are very picky eaters. They're like, they have the sensory processing issues, probably from two very sensitive parents.
My kid, my son in particular, pretty, somewhat picky eater. And I think it's one of those, again, kind of challenges as parents, right? You're asking like the barriers to this. And, especially for folks thinking about family and feeding kids, right? A lot of these foods, like at the top of the antidepressant food scale, right? Things like oysters, things like greens, they're not things that kids naturally eat or often have been introduced to. So, for example, my kids are okay with kale, but they really love kale chips, and they really love my kale mac and cheese.
Kale mac and cheese.
I don't sneak it in. I just kind of like it's like a green kale mac and cheese, but there's like, I don't know, half a pound of kale in there. So,
oh wow,
I think there's a lot of pressure on parents, and I think it's also where, I don't know, there's been like our culture has always been in love with the idea that, boy, who knows, maybe there's some nutrient not getting, you should take a multivitamin, like that's nutrition. So.
Oh yeah, and you're a little bit critical of that sort of
I think I'm
multivitamin.
Yeah, I'm full on critical of the multivitamin. I just think it's a bad public health policy to think that there's an insurance policy for not eating well. This idea like, oh, it's an insurance policy. It's like, an insurance policy for what? Like, and I appreciate, look, there are times we need multivitamins. If you're in a situation you can't eat well, you're in a food desert, you're really struggling, and you really have food insecurity, you're in a refugee, like, sure, like multivitamin all the way. You're recovering from addiction, there are a lot of times that supplementation is appropriate. I just find the way that I see it used in my practice is really not intentional. It's people taking a lot of things out of fear and often really bad recommendations and
very expensive. There's some psychiatrists who prescribe them, and it's like, it's a couple $100s a month by the.
Yeah. I mean, oftentimes there's a real significant markup in specialty supplements. And I think it's a real concerning part of bias in the industry that people don't talk enough about, where, I have no financial kickback if I give you Prozac or Zoloft or omega-3 fats or whatever, right? That doesn't change my bottom line, as opposed to if I'm selling a supplement line or selling it in my office, that becomes, for some practices, 25, 30% of their revenue. And they're very much marked up. I mean, you should always, if you're getting a specialty supplement, just compare it to Amazon and see what, I've seen vitamin D for like $65 a month, whereas vitamin D, I mean, $65 a month, that gets you more than a year's supply. So it is a concerning thing that happens. I also think it's where people go kind of willy-nilly and they treat their body like this, I don't know, everything you put in your mouth, your body has to process, right? It's not like you take all this extra iron, like iron is an oxidant, right? It oxidizes things. So you take in lots and lots and lots and lots of iron. That's one of the reasons high iron intake is linked to colon cancer. It's your body has to do something with it, for any nutrient. Mm-hmm. And I just always like to think about that as really trying to work in harmony with my body, not to overtax it, and for sure not to undernourish it, and just to be really intentional.
Yeah, I think this is a part where I have some respect for you, because I think you could make so much money promoting a supplement, but it doesn't even seem to have my sort of natural barometer is like, okay, that's how that person could make money, but you're not making money that way because you don't believe in it. I appreciate that.
Well, who knows what'll happen? I haven't done any supplements yet. Sometimes I feel like I don't know which ones to recommend to patients, and it would be nice to do a really low cost basic line. But then, then it feels, then it feels also like I'm getting a little spoonful of my own medicine, right? Wouldn't that be the ultimate way to, like, if you really are going to complain about an industry and how corrupt it is, like, I don't know. One thought I've had is like, well, it's kind of the opposite. Like, I should join it and do a line of really low cost, really effective, really clean things but yeah, I haven't gone that path, in part because it just feels that it makes you biased. And I'm always a little skeptical. I mean, I've always been that way. I think part of that is being a psychiatrist. I see a lot of things work and I see a lot of things don't work, including the things I prescribe. And I think it just adds a humility to how I think about these things, where, there's often a lot of
Well,
So
I think it's good that you're preaching this, and I wouldn't put it, I wouldn't think less of you if you created a good line eventually. But the thought that there's some people who will do a lot of questionnaires and maybe even like some very expensive imaging, and then they'll say that you need this vitamin, and it's like I don't think that is evidence based to recommend vitamins based off of this kind of stuff. I mean, what we're talking about today is like eating real food. It's like,
yeah, eating real food, which, by the way, first vitamin, I was surprised, first vitamin discovered in 1912, right? So just a little over 100 years ago that we actually could say like, oh, wow, this is a vitamin B1, first one. We didn't really know what these things were. We really couldn't isolate them. We never took them in, we'd take stuff, we'd take like desiccated liver, we'd take, people would eat placenta. I mean, there was a way that we engaged in certain types of, supplementation. But yeah, I had a Korean friend who told me that after childbirth, women were encouraged to eat a seaweed soup, which kind of makes sense because the number one cause of mental disability in the planet is low iodine, is cretinism from low iodine. And so, there are all these ways that humans have gotten proper nourishment, that we've co-evolved with food. And so that's why I tend to look there as the first solution. And also, I would say the other reason, and where I think supplements and kind of medicine is really missed something, is now waking up to it, is this whole new notion of the microbiome. And so the idea that, I'm just going to drop things down into my colon and like not really care how it affects my microbiome, and that's totally changed now, where, anytime you're eating more plants, more fermented foods, you're in general trending your microbiome, all the bugs that live in our gut, towards a less inflammatory, more diverse kind of profile, which is looking like it's really tied to a lot of quite good health outcomes.
Yeah. And you talk about the rat or mouse study where they took all of the bacteria out of the mouse and they didn't handle stress as well.
Yeah.
Right?
The reason that we think, and this is really evolving, if clinicians are interested in this, I've got some information up on my site and a blog about it, but there's this great study by Wastick and Gardner that came out of Stanford, really kind of advanced, like all the omics, the genomics, the proteomics, the metabolomics, really advanced study looking at a group. Some issue in the sample. The sample was mostly women. It was like 83% women, mostly white and mostly affluent. So they're already in some ways kind of a demographic with reasonably healthy eating. But they did a 17-week protocol of eating more plants. They took people from about 21 grams a day of fiber to about 45 grams a day of fiber versus eating more fermented foods, where they took individuals in their intervention group from 0.4 servings of fermented food a day to 6 servings of fermented food day. It's plus or minus 2. So, like 4 to 8. I've been emulating that recently as I stopped drinking, and I'm drinking a ton of kombucha instead. And but what was remarkable about the study, though, is, besides all the kombucha, was the plant folks, they didn't change their microbiome.
Yeah.
They didn't change the diversity of the microbiome, and they didn't change their immune status. What they changed is, in the microbiome, the number of enzymes that digest plant walls went up. So eating more plants, like meh.
Okay.
The folks who ate more fermented foods, their immune systems were much, much improved per these researchers' metrics. Their microbiome diversity, by all measures of diversity, went way up. They had a number of biomarkers that improved. So there was this notion, the more and so then how's that working? And another interesting part of the study is not necessarily working that like we eat the good bugs, as I call them, and eat to beat depression and anxiety, and then they go down there and populate. What's interesting is what changes in diversity, at least in this trial, was all these other bacteria. And so it's almost like the bacteria we eat, one thought I had almost like from basketball is like they kind of like box out some bacteria and allow these other species that are already inside of us grow. It's one of the ways that you can really, I think, get so deep into the science now. And oftentimes it gets reduced to like, take a probiotic. And again, when you talk about like waste of money, There are a few, besides the soda aisle, I mean, there's few places I would say that more people waste money than the probiotic aisle. It's just really, it's just, there's a kind of shotgun approach, and there tend to be really like a good quality probiotic is $50-$60 for a month. I mean, it's, or more. And so, and especially when you think, at least in our clinic, like what you want to beat all the probiotics on the shelf, like drink kefir in the morning, make a little kefir. All of the Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety smoothies have a kefir base. And if you're non-dairy, you can do a coconut kefir. Kefir has more colony forming units than anything else I've been able to find. And if folks listening know something more, I'd love to, maybe natto, but in terms of stuff that, Americans will eat. Kefir, it's a liquidy yogurt. If you don't know what it is, I would recommend you get plain so you don't get a bunch of sugar. And then
where do you get that? Is that
right by the yogurt? So you'll see it. It's like in a little carafe by the yogurt.
Okay,
There's a couple. If you're on the West Coast,
how does it compare to yogurt? Because I usually do yogurt.
It's more liquidy, and it's a little tart, a little more tart, a little more. But not too. I like it. Yogurt. When I put yogurt in my smoothie, I feel like I'm drinking a yogurt smoothie. And I'm like, meh. When I put kefir in the smoothie, I feel like I'm drinking something special. My favorite smoothie is kefir. I want you to get some, David, and try it.
Okay.
You're going to love this.
Oh, man. I want you to come be my chef for a week. How much would that cost?
Will you be my rowing coach for a week?
Oh, heck yeah. Come out to Orlando. I'll take you out 100%.
I haven't gotten a squat rack yet. I'm kind of scared to get that belt on. I feel like I'm going to pop something in there. But
No. You put the belt rack below the ribs,
I just feel it's all going to squirt out somewhere, all that weight.
No, you put, it's the Valsalva, it creates the Valsalva. And you don't need a squat. You don't need a belt until you get above maybe the mid 200s.
Okay, that's good. I might not get there at my age.
Well, dude, let's get you squatting, man.
Let's go back to your smoothie. So I want to get some kefir, especially I think your kids will like this. And I get them involved. The other thing I like about smoothies, you get kids involved. I tend to sweeten all my smoothies with like bananas. Sometimes people like them smooth. You can drop some dates in there. But banana, I find one banana does a great job. And then there's a couple of there are two that I'm vibing with right now. Besides like the wild blueberry and whatever else you put in there, my general smoothie rules is put in some nuts, right? Because you're going to get
100%,
fiber, you can get some healthy fats, right? So some almond butter. And then I like going either I've got this chocolate peanut butter cup smoothie recipe where it's cacao powder, almond or peanut butter, a banana, some Brazil nuts. You can throw anything in there, pistachios. You even toss your microgreens in there. I don't think it's the best use of your plant veal, but if you love the microgreens, you can drop them in a nice smoothie. Another one that would be good for the microgreens, I like a kind of banana I just do like a cinnamon, banana, and cashew, and then drop your microgreens in there. That's a good smoothie right there. So the idea is you're getting tons of colony forming units. You're getting all the fibers they need to grow. And just value wise, a jug of kefir is like $4.
Cheap. Okay.
It's pretty cheap. And there are there's national brand Lifeway that's great. If you're out on the West Coast, I love these folks, Kefir Labs, little small producer. I don't have any affiliation with either. Those are the two that I tend to see and like. Yeah.
That's okay. That's something I can change. That's good. I like that. I
hope your kids, especially if your kids are having some, I feel like the banana cinnamon cashew is real kind of, just really mild and delicious and light. And you have like a high-speed blender to like whip it all up real nice, like a Vitamix or something like that.
I imagine some people, psychiatrists are listening to this thinking like probiotics, like really, like what's the data on that? I haven't heard about that.
Well, a lot of people haven't heard of the data on that. I think a lot of folks have in clinical practice. I think, I think we're always in mental health hesitant about new ideas in a certain way. There's a bias we have because we get good at something, we help people a certain way. And so it's hard to sort of think that like, and in some ways, maybe it's a creep of like, people don't think it's within the scope of their practice, but I really think with the current data that's changed. And so the data on the microbiome is really evolving. It's not conclusive in any way. I would say the study that I liked the most about probiotics comes from a study in bipolar disorder at Johns Hopkins. Really interesting trial, 2 40-person arms, so 80 people in the trial, admitted for acute mania, all given treatment as usual, lithium, Depakote, or an atypical antipsychotic. Then half the group gets a probiotic, half the group gets placebo. So over the next, and they do a couple of measurements. One, they measure something. I've not seen this in a mental health trial before, but we're going to see more of it. They measured an inflammatory index. So they looked at a number of kind of antibody levels to some weird viruses that gave them a sense of someone's, a measure of inflammation.
Okay.
They found the individuals who got the probiotic, who had high on the inflammatory index, they over 6 months had a 90% reduction in their rehospitalization rate. And when they did get hospitalized, it was for something like 2.5 days versus 7 days. So that study just blew my mind in terms of is well controlled.
What was the other side of the arm? Like, what was the rehospitalization rate of the other half?
I don't remember.
But it was considerably different?
It was much higher. It was like 60 to 70%. I don't want to get quoted here, but it was much higher. It was significant. The 90% stood out also as just like, that's a pretty good number in bipolar disorder for any medicine. But
okay. So that's supporting this idea that the microbiome is important for people with a variety of mental health issues.
The idea, I think, that's new, if people haven't heard about this kind of stuff and it sounds like weird juju, the idea that I think resonates is that if we think about inflammation in the immune system, those are really largely regulated by the gut. The majority of your immune system's in your gut. When we think that the type of bacteria in your gut, in part, it's dictated by a lot of things. Were you breastfed? Did you have a vaginal birth? Did you have antibiotics? But your microbiome is, in terms of things you do in your life, really dictated by how many plants you eat, the diversity of plant fibers you eat, and the amount of fermented foods that you eat. So microbiome is determined by diet, and inflammation and inflammatory status in part is determined by microbiome and diet. So that relates now as we think that, studies are saying up to a third of our patients with depression and anxiety have significant elevated levels of inflammation. Really interesting, I think, data coming out, looking at the genes that regulate inflammation and how that also relates to our mental health. And then just some big meta-analyses that have come out looking at, if you look at people with depression who get an antidepressant plus any anti-inflammatory, and a lot of medicines like statins, powerful anti-inflammatories. I learned in the study Provigil is an anti-inflammatory. Some of the antihypertensives are also anti-inflammatories. Many of the diabetes medications are anti-inflammatories. So SSRI plus any anti-inflammatory, and you have almost a double of the response rate in these meta-analyses. There are two really large ones. So that's the kind of data that I think supports this idea. And then we just have the concrete data. So depression, it's a really nice study looking at how the Mediterranean diet buffers inflammation and depression. And it's maybe one of the ways that it helps. So if you look at, there's a study that looked at the Chianti data set, and it saw that individuals, anyone who gets depression, your interleukin-6 levels go up. It's interleukin-6, just like one of the interleukins, kind of a generic marker.
It's an inflammatory marker, yeah.
Yeah, generic marker. So everybody with depression, part of depression is your markers of inflammation, IL-6, go up. But this study over 6 years looked at individuals in the Chianti study and looked at their interleukin-6 levels. And individuals who adhered to the Mediterranean diet, their IL-6 levels didn't go up. They still went up, but they didn't go up as much. It was like 1.5 versus like 2.5. And so one of the ideas is that our lifestyle choices like diet, movement, things we do to kind of reduce inflammation and stress in our life is one of the ways that these dietary choices help, one, prevent depression, right? And then also when individuals are depressed, help reduce the impact of their depressive episodes.
Yeah. And I would also add the omega-3s go on to make anti-inflammatory mediators, like resolvin E1, protectin D1,
EPA, rise all these eicosanoids.
Right. Whereas the omega-6s go on to make like the more like pro-inflammatory mediators.
Yeah, these arachidonic acid pathways. This is actually a really kind of controversial part of the nutrition world. I think it makes sense.
Okay, well, what am I right or wrong? Is the controversy showing something
you're
else?
Right. The general idea is that omega-3 and omega-6 fats, they're both long chains of PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids. Some of the longest fats in our body. So, for example, when you eat a steak, right, and you have saturated fat, those are like 12, 14 carbons long. These long-chain fats, EPA and DHA, are like 22, 24 carbons long. Omega-6 fats are also essential. And I kind of, when I talk to people, I compare them often, like it's, the difference between like a SWAT team and like a really good community-oriented police officer. Like they're both really necessary, right? If someone takes hostages at the bank, you want a great SWAT team. But, you also need folks out there really, keeping peace in the community. And so I think about the community-oriented police officers as really the omega-3 fats, and the SWAT team like the omega-6 fats. And so you wouldn't want too much SWAT team in your body, right? It's just going to like, you don't want the SWAT team to respond to like when there's a traffic accident, right? It's going to be too much inflammation. It's sort of the analogy we're making. And so there's some controversy in this data. The cardiologists, they're big on omega-6 fats in the sense that they think polyunsaturated fatty acids in their data suggests, are just better than saturated fat. So you replace butter with corn oil and soybean oil, that's decreasing heart disease risk. There's not a lot of data about this in mental health. There's one study showing a real strong correlation between omega-6 and omega-3 fat ratio and the risk of depression and anxiety as a teen. So if you're 12 or 13 and you got more omega-6 fats coming on board than omega-3s, the ratio, by the way, is about 10-1 in Paleolithic diets. And in our modern American diet, we've kind of doubled that. So what's this all mean? It just means if you're eating a lot of fried food, a lot of soybean oil, a lot of corn oil, if you use vegetable oil in your house, one simple thing to do is to kind of eliminate fried foods and or use things that are more, I would say, like pan fried in something like an avocado oil, but to switch over to olive oil, right? Instead of fried foods, we have a lot of French fries in our house, but they're olive oil oven roasted potatoes that are delicious, full of iodine and vitamin C, and kids gobble them up. A good example of that's a really different beast than a French fry. So yeah, the omega-6, omega-3 idea also is what kind of supports where we come on seafood, which is just, there's a lot of data about fish oil in our field in mental health, but not a ton of data about fish, some. And the data about fish is pretty positive. So if you look at things like you want to prevent peripartum depression, 6 months prior to pregnancy, a really great idea is to get women to eat more seafood, more sardines, more anchovies, more small fish, more wild salmon, and avoid fish with a lot of mercury. They're avoiding swordfish, old tuna, mackerel, and tilefish are the worst. But it's just a good example. That's a way we're going to build omega-3 stores, which that's what baby's brain is made of. So it's generally a good idea. And then there's a really kind of strong protective effect in the data, like a significant reduction. I think it's 6 times reduced risk or something like this of high omega-3 fat intake in terms of preventing postpartum depression. So, there are a lot of, there's a lot of controversy, but I think the bottom line where I come down is omega-3 fats seem to be quite helpful in some data. The meta-analyses of omega-3 fats in depression basically show clinical insignificance, but statistical significance. So you get about a 1-point reduction on the Hamilton D scale, at least in the most recent meta-analyses I've seen. And so, the challenge with that is like, well, if you're battling depression, like anything that drops HAM-D, I'm down with. If you look at the studies that are like 1 to 2 grams of fish oil, and that's where, eating a nice piece of wild salmon has like 3,000 to 4,000 milligrams of long-chain omega-3 fats. So you end up with a lot more omega-3 fats, often out of seafood than you will out of fish oil pills.
Right. So I want to show you this. I've been working on this question of EPA versus DHA, how much. There's this one study that looked at a really nice plot here that showed if the EPA was greater than 60% of the fish oil pills.
Sublet study? Elizabeth Sublet?
This is Sublet, yeah.
Yeah, this is so Elizabeth Sublet is at Columbia. She's a great researcher. She and Jeff Miller are doing some really exciting work. If you're interested in research in mental health, Jeff and Elizabeth are awesome. They're doing like cool imaging, inflammation. They've got some studies that are going to, I got a little preview and I can't say, but it's gonna, cool. I can't wait to talk about it with you next time. It's just super cool microbiome research. But yeah, this is the critique of the study. I think is these are all of the positive trials.
Oh, really?
That if I remember, that was the rumor that I really like this trial. This is the trial that kind of had a shift to emphasizing more EPA, more than 60% EPA in your fish oil pill. It complicates things for vegans because it's hard to find vegan EPA, and vegan DHA is an algal DHA because the fishies, they concentrate the algae for us, or these fats in algae, and even those have like 100 to 200, 300 milligrams of DHA, like minuscule amounts. It's like when they put it in milk, it's like, it's like 17 milligrams of DHA in your kid's milk, and I think anyway, I guess some's better than none. But David, you brought this up. Tell me your thoughts on this.
So basically, it showed that a high EPA fish oil was probably better than the DHA. Anyways,
that's how fish is, by the way.
What do you mean? How fish is?
Fish generally has more EPA than DHA. It's like when you eat a piece of salmon, it's more EPA than DHA, if I recall correctly.
Well, I think part of the problem that I've seen in a lot of these studies that I look at is it's not really shifting the diet very much. So for a while, what I did was I made an Excel sheet with all the foods that I was eating and the amount of omega-3s and omega-6s in each of the foods. Like I went through and found that, created an Excel sheet, and I was measuring how much my ratio was of omega-3 to omega-6.
How'd you do?
Oh, you want to see the data? I'll pull it up here.
I would. You're such a good patient. It's like, no. Even I don't do this. I just try and eat wild salmon, anchovies, sardines, and mussels. Those are just so everybody knows my.
Well, I was fascinated by this idea of the ratio.
Yeah.
And so, what I did was I was looking at like the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio, if and per day I would write down like what I was actually doing. So you could see some days my omega-6 to omega-3 ratio was like a 7. But some days I was able to get the 3 down to like a 0.38. So a lot more omega-3s to omega-6s. So I was trying to hit like certain points of the ratio and move the ratio down. And just trying to see like how hard was this? Like because there was this idea.
How hard was it? What did you find helps you do that? I mean, was it hard to do?
I think if you eat flaxseed, chia seed, and fish, salmon specifically, it was pretty easy to move it down. You
were counting ALA? That's true. I mean, that counts. I just hadn't really thought about that.
ALA? What do you mean ALA?
ALA. So the chia and the flax is ALA. It's a 18 carbon omega-3 fat.
Yeah. And so, I was counting that.
Which it's an omega-3 fat. It's not, in the book in a nutritional psychiatry, I tend to emphasize just the long chains. There's good data that shorter chains help. We certainly convert them to EPA and DHA. I think sometimes people kind of confuse or they're really excited about their flaxseed oil and chia seeds and those things. And there really is no data that those help with mental health.
Okay. That's helpful to know.
But they do help with the ratio. And in terms of actually depression risk, there is a study of olive oil, of monounsaturated fat intake, decreasing depression risk over 10 years. So, but that's super cool.
Monounsaturated fat is higher in nuts, higher in olive oil, right? That's what makes
lard is 50% monounsaturated fat, but people don't recommend that anymore. But olive oil and nuts, when you think about like nuts, because nuts also have omega-6 fats. But the thing about nuts is just really trying to, the monounsaturated fats, and then some of the like almonds are just one of the best sources of vitamin E. Vitamin E is really highly correlated. Low vitamin E is highly correlated with depression. Kind of makes sense because vitamin E is a fat soluble antioxidant. So it kind of wedges in our neuron membranes and is, kind of in some ways make intuitive sense. Like, all right, more of that firefighter up in my brain is probably good for my mental health.
So the high MUFAs, that's what you really want, right? MUFAs.
Yeah, if I were going to think about the fatty acid intake that's sort of ideal according to the data, like what is the Mediterranean? You're going to mostly be eating monounsaturated fatty acids, probably from your plants, your nuts, and your.
Okay, I'm getting confused. Were we just talking about PUFAs or MUFAs just a minute ago?
MUFAs. I thought you said MUFAs. I thought you said the Mediterranean diet would be MUFAs.
But the Mediterranean diet is the monounsaturated, right?
Yeah, well, Mediterranean
Nuts are monounsaturated.
They're going to have more. The olive oil is monounsaturated fats.
Right.
The nuts are mostly monounsaturated fats.
Yep.
And then you're going to add in your omega-3s with the seafoods. And where I kind of think people should focus, where I tend to focus, is really just trying to increase the intake of monounsaturated fats, increase the intake of long-chain omega-3 fats. Because the omega-6s kind of take care of themselves. They're in a lot of different things. And
so it's the long. So I appreciate that. So you really focus in on getting the long-chain omega-3s. Yeah. That's what you're really pushing. And then you're focusing on nuts and olive oil to get those high MUFA.
Yeah. Yep. And the nuts and the others, I'd throw the chia, the flaxseeds, those things. I'm thinking about those mostly for their fiber, where I'm throwing in, I'll throw in flax meal into my oatmeal, okay, just to really bump up the fiber, or I'll throw some chia seeds into a smoothie again, just to be bumping up some nutrients and fats and fiber.
Yeah. What I think about fiber, greens, salads, oatmeal has some good fiber, right?
Oatmeal's, yeah, one of the best breakfasts, great source of fiber, lots of really interesting data that oatmeal actually kind of decreases inflammation and really, really good for the gut, really good prebiotic fiber. One of the swaps, I see people eating breakfast cereal or sweetened breakfast cereal, swap them over to oatmeal where, if you want it sweet, just sure. But you control the sweetness, drop in some honey, drop in some maple syrup, drop in some brown sugar if you want, right? But also maybe drop in some fruits, some berries, some nuts. So again, you're getting a lot of fiber, but not just, getting usually just big blast of sugar that is most processed cereal.
Really, really cool. Yeah. And some of you may ask, like, what was my finding from my personal study of doing this?
I'd like to ask that. What was your finding from you? You ate a Paleolithic ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 fats.
Let me show you my data, my hard data right here. My resting heart rate was one of the things I was looking at. And you can see there's a lot of resting heart rates. I was wearing like a Fitbit. It was around 70, 60, 67. And by the end of it, and I was exercising and stuff as well, I was in the 50s.
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
How'd you measure your VO2 max?
This was a formula that I found online where you could look at resting heart rate, maximum heart rate. So I created the equation in my Excel sheet. I'm kind of a nerd like that. So I was trying to look at age and the different variables. And
I love your Excel spreadsheet here. This is really nice.
You should see my budget one. It's like next level.
I'd love to see your budget one.
In my coaching with physicians, I'll sometimes pull out like my budget exposure because people have a lot of anxiety, like leaving, whatever practice they're in to go to like private practice. And I'll pull out my spreadsheet and just show them some numbers, of like
does it scare them more that you have such an organized spreadsheet, or does it reassure them?
It takes away anxiety immediately. And it gives them courage to spread their wings a little bit, realizing what their value is on the free market and how often, if you're working for a big employer, they take 70% of what you're billing.
I didn't know those numbers. That's definitely much higher than the share we give our clinicians in our clinic. So yeah, I do think most, I think it's hard to step out. I mean, I've been in private practice, I guess this is my 17th year. And so it's really struck me how, I don't know, I think our field is really changing and probably revolutionizing in how we think about the structure and kind of communities that support us in mental health. I think there have been just, oftentimes really kind of pretty traditional path. And I think that's shifting so much with, it's really exciting time to be in mental health.
Okay. So anyways, from my working out, from all the stuff I was doing, my heart rate went down about 10 beats per minute.
Do you think that was some of the fat ratio? Do you think that was like healthier diet that like going after that fatty acid ratio kind of helped clean up?
I was losing some weight during it as well.
Is that also when you moved and you were like rowing like a...
No, this was actually a study I did on myself back in 2017.
Gotcha.
So let's see, by my weight had decreased roughly 15 pounds over that period. So I do this with some people when we want to look at measurables. You know, you have a person who's like burned out, stressed out. It's like, what measurables can you look at for how your body is handling chronic stress, right? Because I think what happens is a lot of physicians when they start out in residency are actually a ton more resilient than the general population. The suicide rate is about 4 per 100,000, whereas the general population is about 12, 13. So residents are a whole lot less likely to kill themselves than the general population. So we start out very resilient, and then something happens in our 50s and 60s where
I think it happens in residencies, don't you? You just get like squashed.
you may feel burned out, and you will score higher on the burnout scale because you're more tired. But overall, compared to the general population, suicide rate is lower. I mean, you're talking about like the Navy SEALs of intellectual elites, you know, who get into medicine, who are fighting this battle, right? But my argument is, what I've seen is that suicide rates go up in the older population of physicians in the 50s, 60s. And so what it is, it's the 20 years of that chronic stress, which leads to people being unhappy, people being exhausted. And so what I've seen in the clients that I've treated is like looking at things like diet, looking at things like exercise. You know, there's so much room to vary there that people haven't exploited, right?
I think particularly for physicians, you know, we have a culture that really, you know, hospitals don't serve healthy food, right? That's where we train. I think that's why I say, you know, I think we set it up in residency that I think, you know, we do start resilient, like you say. I didn't know that the suicide rate was lower. I think with a number of the resident physician and resident psychiatrist physician suicides, it's good to hear that number and reassuring.
The burnout rate is higher among physicians, but you have to understand how they measure burnout. They split the Maslow burnout inventory, which is used, is measured in the general population, and they create a bell curve. And then they say the top third people who are scoring the highest in burnout, we create a line straight down there. And from now on, anyone who scores above that score is burned out.
Sounds like psychiatry, right? 2/3, 1/3.
Well, I would say it's actually not like how we look at depression, because what they're doing is there's no reason why they put 1/3 is burned out, that bottom 1/3 or the top 1/3 scores, right, in the burnout inventory. And so you put someone a little bit sleep deprived in that scale, and you're going to score around 50% of the population is burned out. Now, is that clinically relevant? No, it's the people who you look at their scores and you're like, okay, they're every day showing up to work emotionally exhausted. You know, those are the people or 2 to 3 times a week, right? Those are the people you're very concerned about. They're probably depressed. They say they're burned out because it's like a socially condonable word. Anyways, my point in all this is, having looked at medical education research and having thought about this, it's like, what variables can we actually change in physicians who are stressed out, who feel burned out, who feel depressed, especially in their 30s and 40s and 50s. And diet is one of those things.
I think diet is one. I think the piece that's missing for many people is community. I think especially as you go into private practice, absolutely. I think I had a colleague tell me recently this, a great quote by some chairman somewhere has said, just remember, the university doesn't love you back.
Okay. Let me state this for for completeness here. Diet is not the first thing I think about. I think about busyness, and I think about the environment. In burnout studies, they found that 80% of the reason why physicians are burned out is the environment. And so the studies where they actually try to change the environment, not the physician, have the best effect size. But nevertheless, when you have a client come into your room, they're stuck in an environment. So it's like, okay, how much can you manipulate your environment? Like,
yeah, no, I felt that, especially now for those of us in mental health. I'm sure a lot of people have felt it. Just like, as I've struggled with my mood during the pandemic, like, my Zoom cage is not changing. My patient population, my client need is not changing. And actually, if I don't step up to my job, no matter how I'm feeling, I'm going to feel worse. And so I think it's a real conundrum that physicians end up in, besides, along with poor diet. We don't live in a field or work in a field that has valued the modern value of health, i.e., it's not healthy to work yourself to death. It's not healthy to be aggressive. It's not healthy to be condescending and arrogant. It's not healthy to not eat well. Those are,
or it's not healthy to be chronically busy, noise in our head at all times, often negative noise. And then
and I think what physicians are up against. I mean, I'm quite insulated from this, so I speak from a position of a type of physicianly privilege that I. The I think very toxic environment of reimbursement and documentation, where physicians are spending a couple of hours a day documenting. Yep. It's a way that their work is, critiqued often along a set of guidelines that aren't applicable to the current clinical situation, and they kind of undermine physician self-esteem. And on top of that, it just, it gets there's just a lot of I would say unfulfillment, especially right now with COVID. The number of physicians and nurses and healthcare professionals who are taking a second look at the field, those who've been on the front lines, the numbers are quite high, and also makes a lot of sense, right? Yeah. There's been a shift. The number of stories I hear about healthcare professionals being kind of accosted, it's just really, the kind of things that makes people leave the field.
Yep. Yeah, I was looking at a study on like the mental health influence of COVID. Depression scores up maybe 3 times since it started. And then subsequently they looked at, in this one new study that's coming out, Lancet, from about a month after COVID started to a year after COVID. And people who had kind of ongoing stresses, whether it be financial stresses or, all these kind of unique stresses that we have, the people with the most stresses, their depression rates just went way up. So it's like, sometimes it's the that chronicity of the stress that's hitting people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I felt that. I'm sure everyone listening has felt a piece of that where, I don't know, there was a part going into it. I think anybody who's in healthcare and the helping professions, right? It's kind of like, I don't know, you kind of steel yourself that you're going to help people get through this. And, I think that got us all through 6 months, 8 months. Then I think as people begin to feel in their own personal lives more of the cost of things, the cost and the challenge of everybody. I was a homeschooler before that, but, everybody suddenly being a homeschooler, of not socializing, of not exercising. Right? I think that everyone's ability to kind of tolerate grief, stress, pressure, yep. It just, where you could handle 3 or 4 or 5 stressors, suddenly you could handle 3. And they had a bigger impact of just, and I think that's still ongoing. I saw that statistic come out in the New York Times that 120,000 kids have lost a primary caregiver, a parent or primary caregiver in America. I mean, it's just, that when you think about the effect, the mental health trajectory effect on that, it's just incredibly sad. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's been a tough time. It's good to talk with you. It's good for a face-to-face with a friend here.
It's nice to see you, David. It's nice to talk a little bit about nutrition. I appreciate you highlighting my most recent book and our e-course for clinicians and just your interest in nutritional psychiatry. I mean, you yourself are a nutritional psychiatrist in your own way. Your interest in tracking your diet and diet's effect on mental health. So I really like thinking of you as a colleague out here trying to spread the good word about all the cool stuff that you're doing and modeling. And I would even say the healthy stuff, the on social, I love seeing you drawing and rowing and growing microgreens will be your next. You'll be slaughtering your own baby plants at home.
Man, I can't wait. That's going to be great. I mean, just a note on my social media, like if you go visit my Instagram, you can see a lot of energy I used to put into it. I think during COVID, I just lost any like motivation for social media. I do my own social media. And so I just post like pictures of me rowing or just enjoying life.
I mean, Instagram has kind of become the main platform I operate in, both out of sort of interest and curiosity and just, I don't know, it's the color palette that fits me. But, I think at its best, Instagram is just that, David. I think it's people posting pictures from their life, things that interest them. That's really, that's still where I hope, I don't know, my content goes in terms of really trying to share something. And, while it's a curated platform that's reasonably authentic. But yeah, also you have the podcast, which, is just, this podcast is so cool. You're like 27 episodes in. You talk about all aspects of mental health. What do we have to do? I have to buy a coffee mug, right? I don't have the coffee mug. That's what I want.
I'll send you one of those.
I can't buy it on your website.
If you become a Patreon supporter, you can get shipped one.
Okay.
It's like
all right.
$5 a month, I think. We'll ship one out.
If anybody listening isn't a Patreon supporter, I think you should certainly sign up and support David for just the simple reason it's a lot of time and energy that he could be seeing patients or doing other things that he dedicates to educating all of us. So
thanks for that plug, man. I appreciate that.
Well, it's a true point. This stuff takes a lot of time.
Oh, it does.
Tell me, I want to hear next diet steps for you and next clinical practice steps for you as we conclude our podcast episode.
I'm doing everything by Zoom right now. And I started a nonprofit to do coaching. So it's like a separate business. And the practice, I'm thinking about getting a local place just so I can see people in person. I'm looking forward to that again. I've licensed in Florida, Texas, California to see patients. So I continue to have people who reach out who are listeners of the podcast, which are truly the best patients because they know how I think, they know what to expect kind of. They're the best patients.
It's a way of almost like people, by the time they get to you via the podcast, they have a sense of you and kind of how you maybe fit into their healthcare and mental health journey. That's really,
it's fun because often they're suffering in some way. Like I had one patient reach out like TBI and on all the wrong meds that affect sensorium. They listened to my sensorium episode and they were like, oh wow, there are actually tons of things that we can do to optimize our total brain function. And so they reached out and we're doing that and it's good. So I don't know, practice wise, I think just continuing to do a lot of what I'm doing.
Sounds like return to in-person, which I think a lot of us are.
Some in person. I'll always do video now. I just will.
Yeah, I was about a third video. And then our clinic, our group of clinicians is now really all over the country. We're serving I think our clinicians are licensed in about 12 states. And if anybody's listening is looking for a clinical community to join, we're definitely expanding. But we decided, at least for right now, to go all digital. In part, my practice had been 2 days a week in person in New York, and 1 day, 1.5 days, maybe 2 days a week video. And so I felt prepared for the pandemic, but I keep trying to go back to New York once a month, and it's just not. It just hasn't been feasible. And at some point, as I think about it, we've been forced into this model that for years we thought was kind of like, the bastard stepchild of real mental health, right? That insurance pays less for telepsychiatry, that, it must be less potent. And I have this experience both with my patients and if talking to clinicians that it's been like a master class that we've all had to get really good at it. And there's some stuff that really wasn't obvious to me. How do you run a good dynamic treatment? Somewhat obvious, like I've been working on it for a while, but now just really having to meditate on the meaning of telepsychiatry. What is the power of it? What are the challenges in it? I feel better at it than I've ever been. And we're planning to stay 100% digital for right now. And then wondering, is there going to be a new model that evolves? That's what I'm kind of, is there a model where we're digital, but I don't know, once a year we get to see each other, check in, have a kind of annual, it is just to remember that we're 3D, or is that not necessary? I've had this experience too, where I've had a good groove going in video and then I've seen people in person.
So do you want to hear something?
Kind of disrupts the frame.
So we measure the effect size in this IOP that I've been running in California, and we went all digital. So we watched the effect size change, and we actually had a slightly increased effect size after going all digital. And it kind of blew my mind. I always thought, telepsychiatry, not in person, would not be as valuable. But our effect size actually went from 2.5 to 3. That was surprising. The second thing I would add is I think the microexpression training that I offer is really, really effective at helping people do telepsychiatry better, because sometimes in telepsychiatry, you don't feel the emotions to the same intensity you might if you're in person. But with reading the small moments of emotion, it does really help kind of bridge that.
It's such a, I think, a really cool idea for exploration, which is how do you assess and value transferential feelings in a digital space? This happened to me a number of times where like, I'll almost feel like I'm like super, like I'm feeling really, kind of like there must be something going on with me because I'm feeling so like discombobulated or upset or like, oh, this patient's really angry or whatever, right? Like a powerful transferential feeling, but because I'm, sitting here in my room, it takes a minute to like recognize it as that, as opposed to when I'm in the office, it's like, well, for sure there's transference, it's like just you and me in this room. And so I have found that, and I do think the micro expression one is a great way to think about that, because in some ways that's what we have. And I would also say that's what I like about Zoom, right? Because I'll be out here sometimes hanging out, and I'll come move in a little bit, and then if I have like a good interpretation or something, or you're really struggling, like I notice like I'll end up, and I find patients do that too. Or one of the things I noticed is that I'm closer to my patients' faces than I ever would be in person.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I see that.
When your face is big on the screen, it's like, we are like, it would be like our noses are almost touching, right? And so it's super intimate in a certain way that has really, I don't know, just been.
Wow. I like
just
that.
Sort of struck me over the last, 6 months or so.
Well, I'm going to wrap it up here.
We're going to wrap it up. But
we're going to wrap it up.
You're going to eat your own microgreens. That's your goal. That's your treatment goal until our next episode.
Oh, for the diet stuff. Oh, gosh, I still need to lose about 20 pounds probably. So that's
I hit my maximum ever weight of December last year, the middle of the pandemic. And I never weighed this much. And then
okay. And that makes you feel better.
Yeah, just so you know. Yeah, I and I'm not sure what happened, but then I can say I'm sure what happened. Things sort of shifted for me in a variety of ways, and I got into a healthier groove. And
okay, so I'm going to get some of that yogurt drink.
Kefir,
Kefir.
Kefir.
Kefir. I'm going to get some of that.
Kefir, make some smoothies for you and your kids. You're going to do a little smoothie lab. You're going to try some canned salmon burgers, maybe, and you're going to keep making great podcasts for us in rowing. So I look forward. I am going to be near you at some point. I think I'm going to come compete on my horse in Ocala in February. Okay. And I think last time I was there, we didn't connect, but this time, I mean, I think I'll be there for a few weeks. So you can meet Cinco. We didn't talk equine therapy, but that's going away from my horse. So it just made me cry. David, thank you for a great conversation. Everybody who's been listening, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you sometime in the future.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing you. And we should, I would really appreciate thinking who are the 3 top researchers in this field, and then let's interview them together and talk about their studies. That would be a lot of fun for me.
Oh, that would be awesome. I'd love to do that. We do. I'd love to do that. We could do, for sure we'd interview Felice, and ideally Felice and Michael.
Yep.
I think it'd be really cool to interview Elizabeth Sublett and Jeff Miller at Columbia.
Yep. Okay.
Because they're like, they're sticklers for the data, and they create some of the data. And I think it would be, you didn't ask for the list now. Sorry.
Let's do that, because I feel like no one is coming to people's office with, eat more healthy food, and so there's this natural pressure of psychiatrists to sort of, prescribe medications, because there's just a lot of money and energy behind that. So let's be that for.
And it's exciting when you get it right. It's like, wow. Like, it's just like going on right up there because of that medicine. Like, I mean, it's great. I dole out some very thought out interpretations. They resonate, but when you get a good med effect and it works, like one of the reasons we like it is that it feels very powerful to us. It's very reliant on us. And at times, often, it's super life-changing for patients. So more healthy food. I look forward to spreading the word with you on that, my friend. We'll talk more soon.
We'll talk soon. Okay. All right. We'll leave it there.